Before a single tool was lifted, the shipwrights embarked on a sacred journey. The success or failure of a longship, its very life, was decided long before it ever touched the water. It was decided in the heart of the forest. The wood was the soul of the ship, and choosing it was a spiritual and deeply practical art. Selecting the wrong tree wasn't an inconvenience, it was a death sentence. The Vikings were not just carpenters, they were dendrologists, readers of the forest. They understood that each tree had a spirit, a personality, a destiny. Oak was the undisputed king. It was the wood of warriors, prized above all for the keel and the hull planks. Its dense interlocking grain gave it incredible strength and resilience. An oak hull could withstand the grinding impact of sea ice and shrug off the relentless pounding of Atlantic waves. Furthermore, the high concentration of tannins in oak made it naturally resistant to rot, a constant threat in the damp, unforgiving maritime world. Pine, being lighter and more flexible, was chosen for the mast and the oars. A pine mast could bend in a gale without snapping, absorbing the wind's fury. Pine planks were also sometimes used for the upper parts of the hull, where less strength was needed, to reduce the overall weight of the vessel. Ash was the wood of motion. It was tough but remarkably springy, making it the perfect material for oars. An ash oar could be carved thin and light, yet it would not break under the strain of powerful, rhythmic strokes. Even the humble birch had its place. While too soft for the main structure, its bark was a vital resource. Peeled off in wide sheets, it could be layered with tar to create a waterproof membrane for sealing storage chests or even parts of the deck. To fell a tree was not a casual act. Shipwrights would walk the forests for days, their eyes scanning the canopy, their hands reading the texture of the bark. They sought out trees that had grown slowly, in harsh conditions, as this produced denser, stronger wood. They looked for the personality of the tree, knowing that in a few months it would need to ride the waves like a living creature. This quest for timber was governed by the wisdom of the seasons. Trees were almost always harvested in late winter or early spring. During this time, the sap content was at its lowest, meaning the wood would be lighter, less prone to warping, and would dry more evenly. A log cut in the high sap of summer would be a waterlogged, unstable liability. But the true genius lay in their search for natural shapes. Why waste weeks of labour carving a curve when you could find one that the forest had already grown for you? A shipwright would seek out a tall oak with a large, gracefully curved branch near its base. That branch, with its continuous, uncut grain, would become a rib or a frame element of immense strength. This practice, known as using compass timber, was one of the key secrets to the Longships' legendary durability. It was a partnership with nature, not a conquest of it. Once the perfect trees were selected and felled, the next stage reveals another counterintuitive piece of Viking genius. Today, if we want to turn a log into planks, we take it to a sawmill. The Vikings had saws, but for creating the vital hull planks. Instead, they split the logs. This technique, known as riving, is a masterclass in understanding wood. A saw tears through the wood, indiscriminately severing the long fibrous strands that give the timber its strength. Splitting, however, works with the wood. Using iron wedges and the precise controlled blows of a mallet, a skilled craftsman could cleave a log along its natural grain. The split would follow the path of the fibres, leaving them intact from one end of the plank to the other. The resulting riven planks were far stronger, lighter, and more flexible than any sawn board. They could twist and flex with the motion of the waves, absorbing stress that would crack a sawn plank in two. It was a slower, more demanding process, requiring immense skill to produce planks of a consistent thickness. But the result was a hull that was not a rigid box, but a resilient, almost living skin. Imagine the scene: a team of men working in unison, driving wedges into a massive oak log. The sound isn't the scream of a saw, but a series of sharp cracks and groans as the wood reluctantly yields its form. From this single log, they could produce a dozen or more perfectly shaped planks, each one a testament to their patience and their profound connection to the material. Forget the noise and complexity of a modern workshop. The Viking shipyard was a place of rhythmic, focused sound. The solid thunk of an axe biting into wood, the sharp hiss of a draw knife shaving away a curl of pine, the steady tap-tap-tap of a hammer on a rivet. The tools were few, but in the hands of a master they were capable of astonishing precision. The broad axe was the shipwright's most essential tool, It was not the crude felling axe of a woodsman. This was a sophisticated instrument with a wide, razor-sharp blade, often with a curved edge. It was used for shaping and smoothing the riven planks. A master could wield a broad axe with the finesse of a sculptor, shaving off paper-thin layers of wood to achieve the perfect curve, leaving a surface so smooth it needed no sanding. The adze, with its blade set perpendicular to the handle, was the tool for hollowing and shaping concave surfaces. The shipwright would stand on the plank, swinging the adze between his feet in a rhythmic, controlled motion. It was used to shape the inside of the hull and to create the complex, dished-out forms of the ship's ribs. For finer work, there was the draw knife. A simple blade with a handle at each end, it was pulled towards the user to peel away long, elegant strips of wood. This was the tool for shaping oars, refining the edges of planks, and any task that required delicate removal of material. And how did they drill the thousands of holes required for the rivets? Without electricity, they relied on the auger. This T-shaped hand drill, when twisted with skill and patience, could bore a clean, precise hole through dense oak. Every hole had to be perfect. A misaligned rivet could weaken a plank and compromise the entire ship. These tools were often forged by a local blacksmith, sometimes in the very same village. An axe wasn't just a tool, it was a personal extension of the shipwright's own body, its weight and balance tailored to his hand. The archaeological evidence is stunning. On the preserved timbers of ships like the Gokstad, scientists can see the tool marks left behind 1,000 years ago. Marks so clean, so uniform, that they speak of a level of skill that is difficult to comprehend, let alone replicate. Now we arrive at the heart of the Longships design, the technique that set it apart from almost every other vessel in the world, clinker-building. Known also as lapstrake, this method was the key to the Longship's unique combination of strength, flexibility, and lightness. While most European ships of the time were carve-built, with planks laid edge to edge on a heavy internal frame, the Vikings did the opposite. They started with the keel, the ship's backbone, a single magnificent piece of oak, shaped by axe and adze, laid upon wooden supports. To this they attached the first two planks, the garboard strakes, one on each side. From there they built the hull outwards and upwards, plank by plank. Each new plank would overlap the one below it by an inch or two, like the scales of a fish or the shingles on a roof. This overlapping seam was the secret. It created a series of longitudinal ridges along the hull that added immense strength without the need for a heavy, rigid, internal skeleton. The planks were fastened together with iron rivets. A hole was drilled through the overlapping planks. A blacksmith-forged iron nail was hammered through from the outside. On the inside, a small square iron washer called a rove was placed over the nail's tip. One shipwright would hold a heavy hammer against the rivet head on the outside, while another, on the inside, would hammer the tip of the nail over the rove, clenching it tight. This process was repeated every 6 to 8 inches along the length of every single plank. The result was a hull held together by hundreds, sometimes thousands, of hand-clenched rivets. This clinker-built hull was not rigid. It was designed to move. When a wave struck, the overlapping planks could flex and shift slightly, distributing the force across the entire structure. The ship didn't fight the sea. It danced with it. This flexibility made it incredibly resilient in the violent waters of the North Atlantic. And it made the ship light. So light, in fact, that a crew could haul their own warship overland, portaging between rivers or bypassing waterfalls, giving them a strategic mobility that was simply unmatched. But how did they create the elegant, sweeping curves of the hull? How did they bend thick oak planks into the graceful, dragon-like shape of the bow and stern? Wood, after all, does not naturally want to bend. The answer lay in a mastery of fire and water. The Vikings were experts in steam bending. They would dig a long, shallow trench, line it with stones and fill it with water. A fire was built alongside to bring the water to a rolling boil. A green, freshly cut plank would be placed over this steaming pit, often covered with wet hides or moss to trap the heat and moisture. For hours, the hot steam would penetrate the wood, softening the lignin, the natural glue that holds the wood fibres together. The plank, once unyieldingly rigid, would become pliable, almost like a strip of leather. Then, at the perfect moment, a team of men would work in unison. With a series of shouts and coordinated effort, they would lift the steaming, groaning plank and wrestle it into position against the ship's ribs. Using a system of ropes, levers, and wooden clamps, they would force it into the desired curve. It was a race against time. Bend it too fast, and it would crack. Wait too long, and it would cool and stiffen. Once bent and clamped, it was left to cool and dry, and its new shape would be locked in forever. It was a process of brute force guided by delicate intuition, a spectacle of smoke, steam, and straining muscle, repeated for every curved plank on the ship. A perfectly shaped hull was useless if it couldn't keep the water out. The final stage of sealing the ship was a messy, smelly, but absolutely vital process. Between the overlapping planks in the small gap of the land, the shipwrights would stuff a caulking material. This was typically a mixture of raw, greasy wool, lanolin-rich and naturally water-repellent, and animal hair. Using a wooden mallet and a caulking iron, they would pack this mixture tightly into every seam of the ship. But the true waterproofing agent was tar. This was not something they bought, it was something they made in a slow, smoky process known as a tar burn. They would build a funnel-shaped pit, often lined with clay, and fill it with resinous pine roots and wood. The pile was covered with turf and earth, leaving only a small opening for air. A fire was lit, and the wood was slowly cooked in an oxygen-starved environment. Instead of burning, the wood would release its thick, black, sticky resin, which would drip down the funnel and collect in a container at the bottom. This precious pine tar was then heated to make it flow, and liberally painted over the entire hull, inside and out. It soaked into the caulking, sealing every tiny gap. It saturated the wood itself, creating a tough, flexible, waterproof armour that protected the ship from rot, salt water, and the gnawing of marine worms. A freshly tarred longship would have gleamed a deep, menacing black, its surface slick and ready for the sea. If the hull was the body of the sea dragon, the sail, ropes, and oars were its muscles and wings. The iconic square sail of a Viking ship was a masterpiece of textile engineering. It was not made of canvas, but of wool. Hundreds of pounds of wool, sheared from sheep, cleaned, and then spun into thread by the women of the community. Weaving a sail was a monumental task that could take a team of women months to complete. The resulting woolen cloth was heavy and dense. To make it windproof and water-resistant, it was fulled and then coated in a mixture of animal fats, fish oils, and sometimes even ochre, which gave some sails their famous red-striped appearance, a terrifying sight for those on shore. The rigging was elegantly simple. The ropes or cordage were made from the fibrous bark of the linden tree, walrus hide or hemp. They were immensely strong and treated with tar to protect them from the elements. With this rigging, a skilled crew could raise or lower the massive sail in minutes, adapting instantly to changing winds. But the wind is a fickle ally. For speed in battle, for navigating narrow channels, or for making a silent approach to an enemy shore, the Vikings relied on pure human power. The oars, carved from light, strong ash or pine, were their engines. A full-sized longship could have over 30 pairs of oars. The image of 60 men rowing in perfect, disciplined unison, their muscles straining as the ship surges through the water, is the very definition of Viking power. The mast itself, a single tall pine, was cleverly designed to be removable. It sat in a massive block of oak called the curling and was supported by a unique, fish-shaped wooden partner at the deck level. This allowed the crew to lower the mast and sail, reducing their profile for a stealthy approach or when dragging the ship overland. Finally, after months, sometimes years, of labour, the day would come. The ship, gleaming with fresh tar, its dragon-head prow perhaps carved with terrifying artistry, was ready to meet its destiny. The launch was a community celebration, a moment of immense pride and ritual. The ship would be carefully moved from its building site towards the water, sliding over a bed of greased logs or slippery seaweed. With the entire village cheering, with shouts and songs filling the air, the longship would slide into the fjord, tasting the water for the first time. It was a birth. The ship was given a name: Sea Serpent, Raven of the Wind, Long Serpent. Offerings might be made to the sea gods, Njörður and Aegir, asking for their blessing and for safe passage. The ship was no longer an object of wood and iron. It was a living entity, a member of the community, ready to carry its crew to fortune, to fame, or to a warrior's death. When we look at a Viking ship today, whether it's the astonishingly preserved vessels of Gokstad and Oseberg, pulled from their burial mounds after 1,000 years, or a modern reconstruction sailing on the open sea, we are looking at a miracle of craftsmanship. These were not primitive vessels. They were the product of a sophisticated, holistic approach to engineering, where every element was perfectly adapted to its purpose. The clinker-built hull provided a unique combination of strength and flexibility. The shallow draft offered unparalleled strategic mobility. The dual power system of sail and oar gave it both speed and stealth. All of this was achieved without blueprints, without power tools, and without modern measurements. It was born from a deep, intuitive knowledge of natural materials, a set of ingenious techniques refined over centuries, and a culture that placed the ship at the very centre of its world. So the next time you see the iconic silhouette of a longship, remember the story held within its timbers. Remember the shipwrights walking the silent forests, the rhythmic strike of the broadaxe, the hiss of steam, the smell of hot tar, and the collective will of a people who, through these magnificent sea dragons, sailed out of the mists of legend and into the pages of history. If you enjoyed this deep dive into Viking craftsmanship, make sure to like this video and subscribe for more fascinating stories from the Viking Age. Drop a comment below. What's the most impressive part of Viking shipbuilding to you? Would you trust a wooden ship, built without a single modern tool, to cross the North Sea?